Hey everybody, thanks for clicking on the video and a happy Florida Derby day and weekend to everybody out there in WPT Nation. Just wild thinking that the first 3 months of the year are in the chart books and we're on the verge of April 1st, a big one in my neck of the woods naturally with the Florida Derby tomorrow afternoon at Gulfstream Park. And a huge one for the stable for West Point Thoroughbreds. We've got three horses, three very nice horses, I might add, running on that Florida Derby Day program, led, of course, by the five-year-old debut of First Captain, who I know I've talked about a lot and have covered First Captain's training throughout the winter down here in South Florida, but really amped to get him going this year. I truly believe in my heart and soul that First Captain still has another level or two to get to that we haven't seen. But I figured, and I won't cover every race. I figured I'd come on, certainly look at the three races. West Point has horses in on Florida Derby Day at Gulfstream. We'll hit the Speaking of the Devil race, even though I don't know if I have any earth-shattering opinions or color to add, given the fact that obviously it's great to have Speaking of the Devil. Really just happy to have him back in the mix and back in the entries. There's two formidable horses in his race at Oaklawn Park on their Arkansas Derby undercard. But I will touch upon that race, and I'll be here the next week if I go over all 14 races, Saturday races at GP. So off the bat, I'll kind of cherry pick naturally again as I mentioned. I'll discuss the three we have runners in, beginning with race number 4. And Giant Game is the first of the WPT trio of runners, going out for Dale off that tough luck runner-up finish in late February. Three horses, in fact. You can see my notes here using the DRFPPs. And prior to writing things down and kind of finalizing at least my take on the card, a DRF formulator is what I use. I love the Timeform US pace figures as well. And if you're, as I'm scrolling through, and in the upper right hand corner, if you're curious about what those red numbers are, it's just a copy of the Timeform US pace figures. I really like their pace figures. They're very accurate. They're easy to use, and even if you don't always agree with how I guess their algorithm sees a race unfolding in the early stages, it's worthwhile, at least in my humble opinion, to go back and check your work, and you might see something that you missed. But anyway, we've got Giant Game coming back in the fourth race. He drew poorly. I mean, that's an understatement. I hate that crummy inside post. And here's hoping he breaks better and cleaner than he did last time out. And I think that tough start clearly cost him the win, although he ran Giant in defeat and has come out of the race in good shape, and most importantly, can get his air. I mean, this is a horse that we had such high hopes for with his third in the BC Juvie at Del Mar in November 2021, and the wheels kind of, and you can see between the Holy Bull and the Tampa Bay Derby, the wheels fell off, and we gave him the time. He can get his air now, though, and now that he can breathe, we're seeing him get back, and I would like to think eclipse the kind of horse that he was when he was on his game during his 2-year-old season. Here's to him breaking better. He's got a really nice cruising speed, and we'll see how he does. He's got his work cut out for him, though, naturally, against the favorite in this race, who I think will be sub 2-1 in Bright Future, who, when he broke his maiden last March, a little over a year ago, I remember texting Mike Rapoli saying, wow, not a Derby horse, of course, winning and debuting at that point in the year, but I was thinking this might be a Preakness horse. I don't know the story with him, but you might think, or at least it's easy to be reasonable thinking says he may have had an issue either pop up or coming right out of that disappointing race at Belmont last June. They've given them the time. Todd's just got outrageous otherworldly numbers with his Gulfstream Park layoff horses. Like here, last 5 years, and I don't want to belabor the point on a short price favorite, but again, adding fuel to what is an imposing horse. I mean, Todd at Gulfstream on the dirt. This is over the last 5 years with layoffs greater than 180 days. He's 35%, 29 for 84. And I tend, when I use trainer stats or at least look at them, I prefer broader, all encompassing stats. I don't like getting too specific, but if you narrow it down to allowance horses, I mean, it's still above 30% with 17 wins. Legit favorite, but I'd like to think Giant Game's got another forward move in him, especially if he gets a better start and just has better racing luck. So good luck to this guy. Big Giant Game fan. You've also got Dr. Blewitt, who's the other sort of key layoff horse. His layoff isn't as long, of course, as Bright Futures, but this is a horse that did some nice things off that trainer change, the Safi, against New York bred restricted company last season up north. How does he do against opens? Pretty tough field as well with Todd's horse and our horse in there. Not an easy spot to return, kind of jumping into the unknown, but a very talented New York bred by not this time. And again, he'll probably be co-second, thirdish choice with us. But a Bright Future is going to take a lot of play there, and rightfully so. I was a little surprised, and maybe I'm wrong. And I don't think he'll be favored. I just was a little surprised in looking at the 12 furlong Pan American. I don't see a bond being 5-1. He's 5-1 in the program, and look, there's a real reality here that, or strong take that his career might just be over and he doesn't want to be a horse anymore. However, he is a 3-turn, 11 furlong to 12 furlong turf horse that was really, and even a 2 mile race, that 2 mile win in the Jerkins back on Christmas Eve in 2021. This is a horse that wants to go far on the grass and wants to use that speed. And I look, after he went off form last spring, not running well in the Belmont Gold Cup, in hindsight, 2020 hindsight being what it is, he was probably just an awful 9-5 favorite, returning at 1.16 miles. And I mean, his race in the McKnight on the Pegasus card, January 28th, it got screwed up. I mean, Agitaire ran off, who was a big long shot, and they hooked and set an incredibly fast pace, an impossible pace going 12 furlongs. Now with Todd taking a step back, he didn't run in the long race on the Fountain of Youth card, and he brings a bond in here fresh. For me, the key to the race is a bond, and whether he's still the Abon of maybe last winter into the early spring. Because the best race he ever ran was in this race a year ago when he was second behind Gufo, who cut him down. So I think the race in a lot of the Pan American in a lot of ways simply goes through a bond. But I have no knocks really on Masterpiece, other than, you know, again, you don't know the machinations, but I thought Tyler rode this horse flawlessly in the McDermott. Switches over to Jose Ortiz off a narrow loss, had a great ride and trip, I thought, and just wasn't good enough getting by Value Engineering and Murad. This might be a slightly tougher race, and again, I think if we have the Abon of old, he's going to be out there free running on the pace and might be a tough horse to catch. I'll tell you, though, the 8 Bay Street Money is interesting as well. I had liked him last time, and I remember doing a podcast in the that weekend at Fairgrounds. I think West Point must have had 5 or 6 horses running. So I did a podcast, and we had Cavalry Charge. Our boy Cavalry Charge was in that race at Fairgrounds. You know, that turf course was unique, is putting it kindly. And although I don't think Bay Street Money ran great in the Fairgrounds turf race last time out, there's no doubt in my mind that he's better than ever now with Mike Maker. Can he go 12 furlongs remains to be seen, but there might be some untapped potential here. And I mean, Mike Maker's as good as anybody, stretching horses out and really, you know, getting them to go 1.25 to 1.5 miles. He's done it numerous times. So the fact that he thinks this horse potentially can go long, I think speaks volumes. And if I was doing picks on the air, like with my old job, might not be a coin flip between a Bond and Bay Street Money. I think I'd go with a Bond on top, but I'm most worried about Bay Street Money in this spot. And again, I respect Masterpiece. If he's favored, though, and he probably is going to be off his body of work, which is very solid, I don't think his margin for error is all that great in this race. Again, I just thought there's an argument to be made. He could have and should have won the McDermott a last time out because he got such a good ride and good trip in that race. And he wasn't a big price. Yeah, he was 4-1, but a very nice horse. But I'm going to take a Bond to be the Bond of old and wire the Pan American. There wasn't a ton of turf form I liked, or prior turf form is probably the best way to put it, in the sixth race for 3-year-old filly maiden horses. Originally, in my first run through, I was like, oh, Tiger Tap. I'm a huge Brendan Walsh fan. You got the big pedigree. Looks like she's slowly taking those incremental strides forward, as this will be her third start of the season. But I don't know, going back, I just wasn't in taking a deeper look, wasn't overly blown away by the race she comes out of on Tapeta. Again, I don't have an overwhelming strong opinion in this race. I might lean into, again, if I was doing picks on the air, Chad's horse. I mean, anytime Chad's got any kind of horse on the turf, no matter the level, that's going to grab my attention. And he's so good with lightly raced horses switching over to the grass. And I had noticed, obviously she's by Quality Road, and Chad probably felt she was just a distance horse debuting her at a mile, and probably with Paco riding, who doesn't ride for him all that often, and the fact she was 10-1, almost was prepped in her first start, like she was going to need a race. And now second time out, boom, you got a rod riding the dam herself by Escandrea, and he, of course, was a son of Giants Causeway. So there's some nice turf DNA on the female side, and the dam was really good on the grass. She won 4 turf races for about 220K. So I didn't see a morning line for this race, but Get Your Kicks was the one that interested me most. Now we come up to the main event. I'm sorry, Forte and Florida Derby. The captain of Florida Derby. The main event on your Derby Day card at Gulfstream is the Ghost Zapper with First Captain. Partial to him. I'm partial to most West Point horses, even though you always want to try to, of course, look at things objectively and be real. But I definitely have a soft spot for First Captain, and on a personal note, on the stable side of things, I've probably, and I'm proud of this and consider it a privilege, I've spent more time with First Captain than anybody, having had him training down here last winter, last summer in Saratoga, and he got in right around Christmas, and he hasn't missed a beat. He just has trained very impressively coming back. We had a little bit of wear and tear on him in the Fayette, and it was just best, even though I still think we should have run in the Woodward against Life is Good. I can't let it go. But things didn't work out in the Fayette, and we put him away. And like I was saying at the top of this little podcast here, I really, truly feel there's more in the tank. We saw glimpses of it last year. I mean, his 3 races from the PIM special, which was awesome, to that brutal beat against Dynamic one in the Suburban. And then the best race, arguably, he ever ran was in the Gold Cup, Labor Day weekend at Saratoga, third behind 2 very good horses in the fastest race he's ever run. I just think now, as a 5-year-old with this pedigree, having watched them train, we're going to see First Captain really hit his stride. And I think, you wouldn't be able, not that it's a layup. And look, Mile 1 to 16th, as much as he loves Gulfstream, I don't know if the first finish line where you have a shorter home stretch, I don't think that helps him. It might not negate him, but I think the longer the better for him, because he's got such a relentless, grindy and just furious closing kick. So a shorter home stretch concerns me a bit. And the other sort of, I guess, thought I have with him, it's not a negative, but it has to be on your mind. It's his first start back. Does Shug have him sitting on like walking a razor's edge? He's ready to run. He needs to run, but do I think we're looking at an A-plus effort, just first back when we're in our minds, and hopefully we have bigger fish to fry in Grade One races? Of course not. So, I still think that'll be good enough, assuming first captain's as good as I think he is to beat this field, because you couldn't have handpicked, and it's not a layup. And I say that with all due respect, and I'm not taking anything for granted, but I don't think you could have really put together a collection of horses better suited for first captain to face in his first start back. Of the others, Simplification, very solid. Just a hard trying son of not this time for Antonio Sano. I'll be curious to see, and I didn't think Charge It could lose the GP mile last time. I'll be curious to see how Endorse does. He strikes me as a horse as good as he's been for Mike Maker. One of these horses that just got freaky good at Gulfstream. We've seen that a lot over the years, and doesn't necessarily transfer his game once like the primetime racing season down here ends, but we'll see. But yeah, you got Simplification coming out of the GP mile after, really keeping a solid body of work, even if he doesn't win all that often, and in fact has not won a race since the Fountain of Youth more than a year ago. And O'Connor scares me as well for Safi, a horse who got a big figure and a blowout win in his U.S. debut back here in October, and didn't really run as well as a lot of people thought he would in the Harlan's Holiday, although Skippy Longstocking and Pioneer Medina have both come out of that race who have done some pretty good things. And last time out, geez, I get taking a shot. That was not a Life is Good, Knicks Go, Gun Runner, City of Light, Arrogate, California Chrome Pegasus. Again, with all due respect, they took their shot, but what chance do you have? In a race where you were a big price anyway, he had post 12. If you like live races, which I do, take note, there's been 4 next out winners, including Stiletto Boy, who really appreciated Flightline was no longer in training when he won the big cap a few weeks ago out west. So O'Connor scares me. A lot of respect at this level and this kind of race for Simplification. But all systems go for first captain, who breezed a really nice half a few days ago with Louis riding. Great to have him back. And, here's to him really, really turning into the horse as good as he's been and was last year, and even during his abbreviated 3-year-old season. I want to see this horse really, really be like just first captain 2.0, who's just a powerhouse this year. Looking at the Orchid, we have our second stakes runner on the day. Now that I'm thinking about it, just like a ice cold double punch. First captain, Anu Atomic Blonde. But our second stakes runner and third and final WPT starter on Florida Derby Day is in the 12 furlong Orchid Stakes. Not an easy spot, of course. And the elephant in the room, naturally, is the other Christoph Euro in the race, the German-bred Amazing Grace. Now, we jumped in with Christoph and bought a chunk of Atomic Blonde last December. She went through the Arcana sale a couple of weeks before Christmas, and that was the same sale Morglair Stud Farm bought Amazing Grace. Now, she cost about 900,000 in that spot. I think she was about 860,000 euros, and clearly her stock went up when she was that third behind Rebel's Romance last September in Germany, when that horse came out of that race to win the Breeders' Cup Turf at Keeneland last fall. Very solid horse. Atomic Blonde wasn't all that far behind her in this Baden-Baden race last September, though. And you can watch the race on YouTube. Amazing Grace won going away, but I thought Atomic Blonde, who set the pace in that spot, ran really well. She proved it wasn't a fluke with that Group 3 win. Didn't fire in her last start in Italy right before Halloween. And we've watched her, at least I've watched her train, and I've tried to share what Atomic Blonde has done this winter at Payson Park with videos on Chatter and on our YouTube page, as she hasn't missed a beat. I talk about the elephant in the room, Christoph having the other Euro who's very classy, like Atomic Blonde. Both of these foreign breds, though, are going to have to run on a turf course that, minus a couple of days ago, early this week, it has been a bone dry winter here in South Florida. Usually you're going to have very firm ground at Gulfstream that might even be magnified because it hasn't rained at all. So, how do they do on very, very, very firm ground? That remains to be seen, and it's something that's in the back of my mind that both of them, of course, have to go out there and do it. Will they like very firm ground? I don't know, but I'm really just pleased with how practical and pragmatic Christoph is, that he not only chose this spot to debut Atomic Blonde, that, feels as though she's trained every bit as good as Amazing Grace, two very classy Euros. Of the American horses or the familiar faces, no knocks on Personal Best, who, again, as I kind of rambled on and on with First Captain, hitting hopefully his best stride from his 4-year-old season now into his 5-year-old season, like classic Shug. I think you're getting a snapshot of this blue-blooded Joe Allen homebred by Tappet, who, yeah, it took her a while to finally break her maiden, but I mean, once she did, I mean, she was off to the races, and just once she got good, while ascending in class, she kept winning and running well. Arad, who's so great, rode her perfectly, because it does seem like when you watch her races, she wants to hang and not put horses away, and he timed it perfectly last time out on Pegasus Day, and she's a worthy foe to both Amazing Grace and our great filly, who's got some stride on her in Atomic Blonde. I can't wait to see her run as well, and much like First Captain, she gets a heart. I forgot the heart for Giant Game. We'll go back at the end. All right, and because I love Giant Game too. The Sir Shackleton Stakes. My opinion in this race wasn't, again, otherworldly. In fact, I say that going, you know what? I don't think I really have a clue in this race. My one take is my prankster's going to be the favorite, not a runaway favorite. I don't know. Do you really want this horse in the 2-to-1 range, despite the top connections? His form as a 3-year-old was okay, but man, I thought when he broke his maiden first out, I think that was Alabama Day. I remember thinking leaving Saratoga that summer, like him and then Jack Christopher. I was like, wow. And he ran fine in the swale, but I don't know how good he is. Could he win? Of course, of course. And if I was playing any multis, I would definitely use him. But I don't think he's got a lot of wiggle room in this race, especially for a horse that has not run since late July. He cannot have any sort of stutter step. Dean delivers my kind of Florida bred, like no real pedigree, just a tough horse. Brutal trip last time, just as a long shot in the GP mile from the rail. And to be honest, I don't think he wants to go that far. He can go a mile, but 7/8 is a better fit for him. I think less is more for Dean Delivers. He's dangerous. Wayburn's done some good things. Won this race last year. Beat Collaborate, who's a tough old horse. Again, I didn't have a super strong opinion other than I might shop around and see how they're betting the race, because I just wasn't overly trustful of my prankster off the layoff, who's going to be the favorite. The Sand Springs, speaking of favorites, I'd likely go with market segmentation off her narrow loss at Tampa. Just love Chad with these fillies on the grass. As she comes back in a big field. Sanibel Island, you've got a lot of fillies with promise, and many of which have run big and have looked good, winning recently at Gulfstream Park. And that includes Jonathan Thomas's horse, Mrs. Astor, who I think I like the most on the rail. Just thought she really looked good in that win January 29th, and JT does an awesome job. But kind of race where you're going to need to get the right kind of trip, you're going to need a good effort, and you're just going to need to get lucky because, again, it looks like a pretty wide open, evenly matched race. That brings us into the Gulfstream Park Oaks, another wide open affair. Did not have Darth Vader last time out at nearly 50 to 1 in the Devona Dale. And I mean, take nothing away from her. She ran like a horse that probably should have been 4 to 1 or less, or even less, maybe 4 to 5, because she went right after Red Carpet Ready. She basically just dueled her into submission and then rebroke and kicked clear. And I think in a lot of ways, with her early speed and the mile and a 16 configuration at Gulfstream, this might be a better trip for her. I'm not necessarily saying she's a horse that wants to run all day, but I think just given how much of an all out war the Devona Dale was between her and Red Carpet Ready, who had never lost prior, she might have a little bit of a slower pace here with that first turn, and it might not be as hectic early. And the shorter stretch, as I talked about with First Captain earlier in the day, may help her out. So I have nothing but respect for Darth Vader. Looking at this fast maiden win last time out, which prompted a private purchase for Sacred Wish, who's now with our good friend George Weaver. I mean, she's eligible to stretch out given that pedigree and run well. What do you do with Atomically, who won the richest final leg of the Florida Sire Stakes down here last fall? Was purchased privately, didn't run great in the BC Juvenile Fillies, and but ran fine. Her effort behind the previously unbeaten Red Carpet Ready and the Forward Gal was excellent, and she, unlike Darth Vader, sat out the Devona Dale and has had, the typical Todd, 6 to 8 weeks between starts. I have no knocks on her. Todd's other filly, Miracle, who I was trying to. Oh, that was the Calvary Charge Day, February 18th. I remember playing pick threes, and I had used this horse just first time Todd and a filly that was pretty good last fall running against Gambling Girl and Maple Leaf Mel. But she ran big with a huge number in her 3-year-old debut. Could Affirmative Lady, who ran fine as a maiden in a couple of stakes, could she improve here for Graham Motion as a daughter of Arrogate? Does Infinite Diamond run a bit better? Who, I mean, won by a pole, didn't run well in the Alcibiades, beat Little. There's my hang up with her. These are way, way, way better fillies than what she beat her last win, two back in the cash run. Could she, after she was simply outrun and run off her feet by Darth Vader and Red Carpet Ready, could she potentially get back on track? We'll see. A wide open Gulfstream Park Oaks. And again, it's just, an idea in my head. Horse wins at 50 to 1 last time out and backing them at 3 to 1 in their subsequent start. But that said, I was blown away with how well Darth Vader ran in the Devona Dale. And good to see Mike Yates, who's just like an old school horseman and doesn't get, an army of 2-year-olds to pick and choose from every year. Good to see him with a pretty nice horse. After that follows the aforementioned Dean Delivers in the Sir Shackleton. Very good trainer there and a good guy. The Appleton, stop me if you heard this before, wide open race. I've been a steady on fan ever since he broke his maiden. In fact, liked him and put a few bucks on him when he returned, and paid a good price in his allowance debut win. His stakes have been good, and he was cut down by a pretty classy stablemate of his last time out in Emmanuel. Another spread race though. Trip is going to be key in the Appleton, and in regards to trips, that brings us into the co-main event shared with First Captain on Florida Derby Day, the Florida Derby itself, which for a long time, like in the first couple of weeks after the Fountain of Youth, I don't know, 5-6 horse field with Forte, just like a huge monster odds on favorite and almost a foregone conclusion. But as last Saturday came near, all of a sudden I was starting to read. I'm sure a lot of you did too. Oh no, we're gonna skip the Wood or Bluegrass. We're gonna run in the Florida Derby instead. And as a result, you've got a race that is just littered with horses that, on paper anyway, reasonable thinking says don't have much of a chance. And the shame of that is I like seeing a 12 horse field for a Grade 1 race, but the shame is all the major or a big chunk of the major contenders drew pretty tough posts, and that's led, of course, by Forte, your reigning 2-year-old champion and BC Juvie winner, just awesome in the Fountain of Youth. And even with post 11, and I saw this stat on DRF.com a few days ago, post 9 through 12 are a combined 14 for 284 at a mile and a furlong since Gulfstream sacrilegiously, the old Gulfstream was knocked down and the new track was resurrected, or came to be in 2006. So history says Forte's got a lot against them, just simply, from a factual mathematics standpoint. I don't think it's going to matter. Big Brown has come up in conversation a few different times this year because he won the Florida Derby from post 12. I think they're two very different types of horses, where Big Brown was just more like brilliantly awesome. That's not to say Forte hasn't been awesome, because he has, but Big Brown was maybe more of a jaw dropper, where Forte's got a little more moxie, a little more grit. But in the end, prep or no prep for the Kentucky Derby, and this, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a race Forte has to win. He's got enough points to get in, and you want him, of course, sitting on his absolute best peaking game on the first Saturday in May. But I hate to be too overconfident or cavalier, even with a horse who's going to be around 3 to 5 or 1 to 2. But I don't think the post is going to matter all that much. And I'm curious. I think when the dust settles, Mage will be second choice. And this is going to be like an old school Triple Crown race, or even Triple Crown type prep. There's going to be some crazy huge numbers. I mean, horses just blown out 50 to 1 and higher, I think. Even with the board being so wacky and littered with double digit odds, I don't see this horse being fourth choice in the race. So I think he's the main danger. Lot of natural ability here, winning with the fast fig, and he didn't run poorly at all with a tough start last time out in the Fountain of Youth. I'll be curious to see. I fell, and it wasn't just because of the name. I remember thinking Messier would run a lot better than he did in the Kentucky Derby. I just cross country ship, former Baffert to Tim Yachtine, who does a good job. Just not for me with Fort Bragg. And our good buddy Dale, here's some good vibes and good tidings to the Outlaws and Cyclone Mischief. It was good to see him after such a disappointing run in the Holy Bull. It's good to see him get back on track last time out in the Fountain of Youth. So again, minus if I do decide to play a pick five. I don't know if I'd bet this race individually, because I think Forte is just too much and he's going to win. But if I was, I'd probably just give the heave ho to Fort Bragg and the Remsen winner, Dubinell outside, given this lackluster. And the Remsen was such a weak race. I know he won, and I can't let it go with Signator that we had to stop on him, because I think Signator could have won that race backwards. Again, with all due respect, but post 12 for a horse that, in my humble estimation, can't give up a lot, even forgetting about Forte. When you size him up from that post against Cyclone Mischief, even Fort Bragg, who I don't really like, and Mage, I'm going to go with the Gulfstream Fountain of Youth horses to come back and pretty much dominate the Florida Derby on Saturday. Let's wrap this thing up with Speaking of the Devil at Oaklawn Park. I know weather has come into play this winter with Speaking of the Devil, and there's been some mild starts and fits with him, but I'm really happy to hear Steve Asmussen has said he's trained really well. He's more manageable now that he's a first-time gelding here. And, here's to this horse breaking better. He really put himself behind the 8 ball, obviously, in those 2 races as a 2-year-old. What concerns me is that I feel as though this race, which is for 3 and up, so there's some older horses in the mix, which isn't like a huge concern, but there's no denying he's got this 4-year-old named Runaway Jack, who's got some crazy fast figures for a maiden to face off against. And I think Runaway Jack and even Miracle Worker for Brad Cox, who's an Into Mischief homebred for the West and lost to a talented horse who's not in my, again, in not my horse. So it's only my opinion, but you know, this horse was purchased privately by the White Barrio gang, and he's in the Florida Derby on Saturday. I think this is a very talented horse. That isn't, in my eyes, the right spot for him. But my point is, Miracle Worker was beaten by, I think, a horse who could be a pretty nice sprinter, 7/8 maybe to a 1-turn mile type horse. And as I said earlier in the podcast, the morning line reflects that. But Miracle Worker and Runaway Jack, even aesthetically speaking, are way better horses than any. And these were big fields. I worried about the quality at the time. Maybe not the quality, that's the wrong way to put it, but just like the overall depth. So wanting to see a big effort. I'm super pumped to see Speaking of the Devil run, and I'll be disappointed if he doesn't run big in the race. But I'm also, part of me saying, all right, we get him going Saturday, and if he can't beat one or two of the favorites, Runaway Jack and Miracle Worker, we've got him, got a race under his belt, and it's on to the next race at Churchill Downs, and we can have a pretty nice horse moving forward into the summer, because I am a Speaking of the Devil fan. And I'm a fan of the Florida Derby. My streaks, on a personal note, my streaks, I had a long Wood Memorial, Belmont Stakes, and Travers streaks going, respectively, spending all those years living and working in New York and working for Naira. So although that streak ended, I'm proud to say I've caught every Florida Derby in person since Always Dreaming. West Point, among others, Always Dreaming back in 2017, and really looking forward to spending not only later today down at Gulfstream Park with some partners that are in town for the weekend, but tomorrow afternoon. It's going to be a great one. Wishing the best of luck and safe trips to all of our horses, both tomorrow, throughout the weekend, and moving on in the future. And can't wait to see so many of you. The first 2-year-old sale of the season was really, really nice. Saw so many familiar and even new faces up at OBS. We bought 4 horses. They were sold out in basically the blink of an eye. So thank you on that. We've got the April sale coming up, and just a lot to look forward to. I feel like the overall vibe and morale is just like super high within West Point, and let's go get them. Have a great Florida Derby day, everybody, and I'll see you around. Thanks.